When it comes to being innovative, we can't implement if we don't have a culture that can do that. Welcome, everybody. Glad you could make it. I'm just going to minimize this. So we're going to talk about human-centered organizations. And never has there been more of an apparent and obvious need to be human-centered in such chaotic times as now. There we go. You don't need me to tell you that the world is changing at an absurd rate. It's quite remarkable. It's quite remarkable right now, what we're going through. If you look at some of the stats, coronavirus is pushing 40 to 60 million people into extreme poverty worldwide. World Bank. IMF says global trade could fall by up to 32%. 40 million newly unemployed people in the US alone. And worst economic contraction in Latin American history. It's safe to say the world at this point. We're living in a VUCA world. Each of us understand that, are intimately aware of that right now. We're stuck inside, we're in our homes. It's not just something that we say when we talk about businesses in general, it's impacting every one of our lives. We're living in that VUCA world. VUCA, meaning volatile, uncertain, complex, and even if you have, may not realize it was actually coined to describe, by the military, to describe guerrilla warfare. When we don't know who the enemy is, where they are, when they're going to strike, that is a VUCA moment. It's quite telling that VUCA is now the term we can use to best describe our daily lives. Half of the S&P 500 will be replaced in the next 10 years. You look at the average lifespan on the S&P 500. In 1955, if we were in person, I'd be asked, get in your head, 33 years. That is a tremendous amount of time. Contrast that with a few years ago, let alone today. Average lifespan on Standard & Poor's Index in 2017, 13 years. That is dramatic change. And no industry is sheltered from this storm. Let's look at hospitality. How many, think in your head, number of years it took the top 5 hotel chains reach 4 million rooms. 4 million rooms, that's a lot. Yeah, 387 years combined. Okay, how long did it take Airbnb to do it? 9 years. Remarkable. And what's going to happen next? So companies realize that to grow, they really must continue to innovate. They can't continue to do the same thing. They must adapt. They must innovate. But what is innovation? If we're going to be innovative, if we are going to innovate, we have to understand what exactly it is. Well, often, if I were to ask the room, so to speak, what some innovation examples are, you'd hear things like, or Airbnb, Spotify, the way that they've revolutionized music, of course, Apple and the iPhone, the iPad. Well, let me ask you, let's look back in history first. What do these 3 people have in common, besides being, old gringos? Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and Steve Jobs. You've probably heard of them. Well, they're each for something they did not create. The inventions that are told in classrooms, in our textbooks. Edison invented the light bulb. Of course he did. Actually, it's not true. Perhaps best way to explain it is Henry Ford's word. I invented nothing new. I simply assembled into a car the discoveries of other men behind who were centuries of work. Goes on to say, if he had started the car manufacturing process just a few years earlier, it would not have been so successful. So we tend to think of innovation as being the idea. It's that new concept. It's the light bulb we hold up. It's the thing we can point to down the road. But idea is not everything. Innovation is also the implementation. Without implementation, without getting something to market, the process of making it real, it's just an idea. But it's not innovation. So if we go to the innovation that tends to pop to our mind, top of our mind, And we see in the trade journals, front page newspaper articles, Tesla, did they invent anything new? No, the idea existed. And actually, electric cars previously existed. Look at iPhone, iPad, everything Apple's created. There have actually been followers on all those fronts. The iPod revolutionized the world. Well, yes. However, it's implementing on the ability to do that, which made them successful. There were dozens of MP3 players previously. Implementation often is actually where companies trip up. It's one thing to come up with an idea. It's another to actually make it real. Why is implementation so hard, though? Why does it trip us up? Well, culture. Number one on the list of issues when it comes to being innovative, we can't implement if we don't have a culture that can do that. Implementation requires an entire culture that can think holistically, build collaboratively, and learn from mistakes on the fly. We need every employee switched on, engaged, if we're going to solve these problems and adapt to what's coming and what is happening. Most companies are actually lacking these, however. Deloitte did a study. 89% of global companies report they're not prepared to build the organization of the future. Furthermore, 80% of the world's CEOs say they don't have the skills in their companies to succeed. 80%. And those are the ones willing to admit it. 60% of employers believe that recent graduates weren't sufficiently prepared for the workforce. So we don't have what we need, and we're looking to the next crop of employees. We're not sure they have what's necessary. Well, actually, they do. Because fortunately, the skills that are needed most to be innovative, to implement, and to create the culture necessary are naturally human skills. It's human talent, the World Economic Forum said so well, not capital or technology. That's the key factor in linking innovation, competitiveness, and growth in the 21st century. To innovate, then, companies would be better off building cultures that foster human strengths, the things that we naturally have with us, rather than ideating around the latest technology. You can pour so much money into the latest technology, but if we don't have a culture that can figure out how to apply that to solve real problems and get it to market, we're dead in the water. So, human-centered organizations are those that are in tune with their customers' needs and also what their culture needs to be. What do they need to be able to deliver on those customer needs? Both are critically important. Well, there are actually 6 core strengths of human-centered organizations that I want to just go over briefly. If you're looking to become human-centered, to reap the rewards, this is what you need to focus on. Human-centered organizations today and previously have a shared purpose. Why are we here? Have a growth mindset. We understand we're not the best yet. We understand we need to work at it, a growth mindset. Agile collaboration. It can work well across different industries, with partners, with each other. Customer empathy, and empathy internally as well. What do our customers really need? And that gut feeling what others need and what their daily lives are like. Systems thinking, the whole, understanding we have to work with one another to actually make this work. And how does that network come together? We need to focus on that. Human-centered organizations understand. And strategic foresight. The world is changing. Doesn't mean we can't have a plan. Amidst the chaos, we can actually imagine what some of those futures would be and then work backwards from there. Just going to give a few examples and then we'll go from there. So a shared purpose. How do you align your strategy and activities around a clear reason to exist? Companies that do this well, one, for example, is Vanguard. Their purpose statement, take a stand for all investors, treat them fairly, give them the best chance for success. Well, if that's your purpose, and everybody understands that, when it comes to pricing, well, we need to stand for all investors. Their prices are some of the lowest. And their success also because their employees are the owners. Google has done a study on what makes their teams most successful. And they found psychological safety is the #1 factor in enabling performance teams. Amy Edmondson out of Harvard Business School has written books and articles on this. I had the chance to meet with her in Harvard in one of the dining halls, and never forget the question she posed to me. She said, "Clynton, if you need a knee surgery, I'm going to give you 2 options. One hospital has an error rate of 15%. The second hospital has an error rate of 5%. Which one would you like to go to?" Well, my first thought is it's a trick question because she's a Harvard professor. But I'm not going to be the one going on record saying, I want to go to a place that is more likely to injure my knee. Well, as you would guess, 5% error rate is more problematic. I should pick and go to the one with 15% error rate. Why is that, I said? That just doesn't make sense. Truth is, most hospitals have a 15% error rate, she explained. 50% one, they're not admitting it. They're not learning from it. It's shoved under the carpet. Psychological safety is the hospital that has a published 15% error rate. They know when they make the mistake, they raise their hand, they share it with one another, and then they work as hard as possible and they make sure that they don't make that mistake again. So psychological safety, not worrying about repercussions, but actually making a mistake, trying and then working to solve that, is absolutely critical. Agile collaboration. Spotify has squads, teams they work with, and it's how they're able to get things to market so quickly. The way they say it, I love. They're loosely coupled, but tightly aligned. There's autonomy within the groups, and that's how they're able to rapidly come up with some new features, but then work with one another to actually make that successful and push it to market. Customer empathy. Maintain company-wide insight into customers' needs. Well, they talk about being a guest, being a host, and really belonging. That is their focus. Well, if you've had a chance, if you ever get the chance, take a tour of Airbnb headquarters. Obviously not now, and it's probably going to look a little differently after layoffs, unfortunately. But if you do get a chance to go there, you'll see all of their conference rooms throughout the entire large building are modeled after hosts' homes. So we had a meeting in one that looked like a cabin, a rustic cabin up in Maine, because it was modeled exactly like one of their hosts up there. That's kind of fun and cute, but it actually serves a purpose. Decisions are being made. You're in an environment with all of the artifacts and the symbolism to help remind you, when we're thinking about the rates, when we're thinking about what it's like to be a host, we're going to make better decisions. Tracking aging forces and adapting a strategy with agility. It's a misnomer that in a chaotic world, you just can't plan for the future. Well, it's true, you can't have the right plan, but it doesn't mean you can't plan. In fact, you should plan for many alternatives. And as you start to learn things and start to see signals change of what might be coming, you adapt as you go. IKEA did this, interestingly, when they looked out at future trends and they saw, a lot of folks are being more transient. They can work remotely. They can live in lots of different places and even opt to just continuously travel. Well, our whole business model is around people having a stable location where they're going to buy our furniture and set it up for a while. What can we do if the world is increasingly more transient? Well, that led to a new furniture rental business model. Instead of selling it, you can rent it based on where you're going to be. This is a great example of how they were able to adapt based on emerging trends and actually led to a new business model. Systems thinking, explore all paths, all parts of the problem to cause real impact. Costco is a store, I'm not sure if actually they're in Mexico like many of the chains are, but it's a warehouse store, kind of like Sam's Club, where you're able to go and buy in bulk. Really popular. They treat their employees really well, but they also think holistically when it comes to the system. When they were looking at the growing trend that folks wanted to buy organic foods, the market was growing. They looked to actually source more, and the margins were high. The margins were low. The costs that they would have to pass on were quite high. So what they realized they should do is invest in the system. They invested in a lot of the organic supply chain processes as well as the end farmers, and they were able to therefore to maintain the right pricing. So if you put it together, the really big benefits of focusing on being a human-centered organization, on leveraging the skills of each individual to be empathic, to understand the whole system, be able to work passion with one another with agility. The results are quite tremendous. Companies that are human-centered stop running in different directions and instead they focus on the right problems. Instead of repeating the same mistakes, they're able to learn and create a culture that continuously learns as they go. Instead of aimlessly chasing the latest tech trends, they build solutions that solve real needs. If you have empathy for what people's needs are, you're laser focused on that and not chasing the trends. Wasting time fighting internal turf wars. R&D says this is our product. We're not going to share it with you because you're not going to serve us well with it. Work across those silos to increase speed when you have empathy for one another. Getting blindsided by market changes. Instead of that, adapt to new opportunities. So those are some of the benefits of being human-centered. But given this chaos right now, let's look at some examples. I wanted to spend a little time looking around and saying, a true test of a human-centered organization is what do they do when the shit hits the fan? In this case, in a very big way. Caveat, nobody's perfect. Every one of these companies has things they can work on, and they should. But the examples that I'm sharing are great. Great example of human-centered organizations and a reason they will continue to flourish and thrive during and after this. The Canadian federal government, you might have seen, they sent out a letter to all employees. One person posted it on Twitter with really human principles for what remote work was going to be. If ever there was a, listen, we hear you, we understand you, we're with you letter, this was it. Just a couple points here. You're not working from home. You're at your home during a crisis trying to work. I don't know, when I read that, I felt a sigh of relief, even though I wasn't working for your personal, physical, mental, and emotional health is far more important than anything else right now. Is that empathy for your employees or what? And your team success will not be measured the same way it was when things were normal. Very realistic understanding of the changes that have happened on people's lives and providing the support and reassuring that we through this together. Make sure you look at the rest of those two great examples. Patagonia, they obviously make a lot of different clothing for the outdoors, highly successful for many different reasons, and truly human-centric in every way. What did they do when pandemic hit and they were forced to close? Well, instead of scrambling to push more resources on online sales and increasing that, they paused all business, including online sales, to make sure they could set up a plan to ensure their warehouse workers be safe and that everybody else along the chain, supply chain, would be taken care of. Really unheard of to actually pause all business if you aren't familiar with Patagonia, that is. If you're familiar with Patagonia, you realize that's in line with who they are. Target. Not in Mexico, but I think many of you have heard of it, and I know many of my students have traveled to the US and actually enjoyed visiting there. A big box retailer, but real with a focus on design impact to all their goods. So they decided they're going to provide early on 30 days paid leave for frontline employees, those in high risk categories. So if you have immune troubles, or you're pregnant, or you're particularly elderly, you get automatically 30 days of paid leave to take as you desire. They also increased wages by $2 for every frontline employee. Yes, there's an argument to be made that should have happened earlier, but still, it's a good human-centered move. Lisa, they make mattresses. It come in boxes similar to those. In just I think it was 3 short weeks, they designed a completely new bed for hospitals to use for COVID patients and shipped it out. Certain wedge that would help them with breathing, the name as well. put it in boxes and ship that in 3 weeks for free of charge. Chobani makes yogurt. Fantastic story on so many fronts. I had a chance to spend an hour with this and truly human-centered in many ways. I invite you to look up the case studies on Chobani. What did they do when COVID hit? Well, they worked with their partners at the incubator to turn their Soho cafe in the middle of Manhattan into a food pantry where all the food was free to anyone who wanted to come by and grab that. It happened quickly. Starbucks provides 20 therapy sessions per year for employees and their families to help cope with changes. They decided to implement that in April. Any employee can take advantage of that, which is a great thing. Mental health, often overlooked or not really valued, really important, especially folks on the front. Tata Group, their chairman and all the CEOs of all the groups took a 20% pay cut to help cover losses. Tata is a massive company built in India. They have everything from motors to technology consulting and everything in between. And they recently jumped in action and provided 100,000 free lodging to medical workers across the world. Medical doctors, I'm sure you were reading, they were running to serve people, but then they realized they don't want to go home because they might be infected and they don't want to infect folks, especially here. There was no way to test early on. And so they were looking for Airbnb locations. Airbnb picked up on that really quickly and said, great, 100,000 free lodging for you around the world. So those are just some of the examples of how companies are being more human-centered and the benefits of becoming human-centered organizations. But I like to make sure we have time for a conversation. It's probably going to be a little different, not being in person, to really hear your stories. But I want to open it up for questions, but also examples, things you guys have come across. Has your organization done something recently that is very human-centered? Are there things that you've read about? It could be related to COVID, but it could be in any other regard, where empathy has shown up, where creativity has really shown up, where folks are thinking holistically together to solve problems beyond the walls of their office. What are some of those examples, and what are some of the questions?